When John Dornelis pointed his camera across the still water of Halibut Cove, Alaska, he thought he was capturing nothing more than a quiet Sunday morning on the job. In a matter of seconds, the water in front of his boat exploded, and something came racing straight toward him with an orca closing in behind it. But what launched itself onto the deck and what happened over the next several minutes left him and everyone who later watched the footage speechless. It was the morning of Sunday, July the 26th, 2020. The same day the country was marking the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, a law built around a simple idea: that no matter how vulnerable you are, you deserve a fighting chance at protection. 37-year-old John Dornelis was doing exactly what he did most days that summer, captaining tour boats for Coldwater, Alaska, a small outfit that took visitors out into Kachemak Bay to see the wildlife of Halibut Cove up close. It was the kind of job where the wilderness did most of the talking: sea otters drifting on their backs in the kelp, bald eagles working the shoreline, and often enough to stop feeling rare, orcas. Dornelis had been spotting orcas cruising through the cove once or twice a week all season. He'd long since stopped being surprised by them. That morning, he wasn't alone on the water. A short distance away, fellow Captain Chantrell Major was running her own boat, and the two of them had pulled their engines out of gear to drift and watch a small pod, 2 adults and a calf, moving lazily along the east side of the cove. It was the kind of ordinary, beautiful sighting that came with the job. It was a peaceful morning, right up until the moment it wasn't. Dornelis had his phone up, filming the whales in the calm morning light. Then a small head popped up in the water about 200 yards off his bow. Dornelis recognized it instantly: a sea otter. On its own, that wasn't unusual either, until he noticed how it was moving. It wasn't floating on its back the way otters do when they're content. It was swimming flat out, low in the water, cutting toward his boat with everything it had. Dornelis had spent years on this water and had never once seen an otter move that fast. When he looked past the frantic animal, his blood ran cold. The killer whales he'd been filming all morning belonged to a specific, specialized category of orca that scientists call transients, or Bigg's killer whales, and they are built for exactly this. Unlike the fish-eating resident pods that pass through Alaska's waters, transients hunt marine mammals almost exclusively: seals, sea lions, porpoises, and otters, and they hunt in coordinated family groups built for exactly one purpose. Dornelis lifted his camera and kept filming, and that's when he saw what was behind the otter. One of the orcas had broken off from the pod and was cutting a straight, fast line toward it, closing the gap with every stroke. The otter had nowhere left to go but directly at the only solid object in 200 yards of open water. "Oh my gosh," Dornelis said, half to himself, watching the animal barrel toward him. "It's coming right for the front of the boat?" There wasn't time to think much beyond that. The otter reached the hull and swam a frantic half-circle around the outside, searching for anything it could climb onto, while the orca surged in behind it. Then, with the orca only feet away, the otter launched itself up and out of the water and landed hard on the stern of Dornelis's boat. The otter was wet and clearly running on nothing but panic. Under normal circumstances, sea otters keep their distance from people. Their ancestors were hunted to the edge of extinction for their fur, and the ones who survived did it by staying as far from boats and humans as they possibly could. For a fully grown otter to deliberately climb out of the water and onto a vessel full of people wasn't just unusual. It was close to unheard of. Dornelis moved carefully toward the back of the boat to get a look at his new passenger. The otter was pressed flat against the deck, chest heaving, eyes locked not on him, but on the water behind it. Whatever fear it had of the man standing over it, the fear of what was still out there swimming was clearly worse. "I'm not going to hurt you," Dornelis told it, keeping his voice low and steady. He didn't get long to enjoy the moment. A heavy shape broke the surface just yards off the stern. A tall black dorsal fin cut through the water, followed by the long dark back of a whale easily 3 tons in weight. Dornellus could smell the warm mist of its breath in the cold morning air as it surfaced to exhale. Across the water, Major's voice carried over from her own boat. "Where did the otter go?" she called out. "On the back of my boat," Dornellus shouted back. The orca didn't leave. It began circling the boat in slow, deliberate loops, dipping beneath the surface and reappearing on the other side, clearly working out exactly where its meal had gone. The hull was the only thing keeping 2 animals apart. A boat is not much of a fortress against 3 tons of muscle. If the whale decided to ram or nudge the stern hard enough to shake its target loose, there was very little standing between the animal on Dornellus's deck and the one circling below it. Starting the engine to get away carried its own risk, since the noise and vibration might panic the otter straight back into the water it had just escaped. Doing nothing meant staying anchored in place with an apex predator patrolling a few feet from the hull. There was no safe choice left, only a smaller risk than the others. Dornellus chose to hold his position and let the boat be whatever shelter it could be. For a while, it seemed to work. Then the otter's nerve broke. Driven by some instinct that told it to keep moving, keep swimming, keep trying, the otter suddenly slid back off the deck and dropped into the water. The moment it hit the surface, the orca lunged. Water exploded around the stern as the whale surged forward to close the gap. The bet had failed in less than 2 seconds. The otter spun in the water and clawed back toward the boat with everything it had left, the orca only a body length behind it. It hit the transom, scrambled, slipped, and hauled itself back onto the deck with seconds to spare. It didn't stay convinced for long. A few minutes later, the same instinct pulled at it again, and it slipped back into the water a second time, this time trying a different angle, staying low and hugging the far side of the hull as if the whale might simply lose track of it. However, the whale did not lose track of it. It reappeared within seconds, and the otter scrambled back aboard in a wet, graceless heap further onto the deck than it had climbed before, as if the stern alone no longer felt safe enough. And then the exhausted creature did something that was completely unexpected. By the last time it hauled itself up, the otter had nothing left. It dragged itself away from the edge and pressed its body directly against Dornellus's boots, laying its head flat against the deck beside him. Whatever caution had kept it from trusting a human being was gone. "You're okay, buddy," Dornellus said quietly. "Just sit tight." Slowly, the shivering in the animal's small frame began to ease. Dornellus still had a job to do that morning, a pickup waiting across the bay. But he wasn't about to gun the engine with a terrified otter lying against his feet and an orca still somewhere nearby. He eased the throttle forward at the lowest possible idle instead, letting the boat creep toward the shallower water of Halibut Cove Lagoon rather than risk startling his passenger back into the sea. The orca followed for a while, its fin trailing the wake, making one last unhurried pass around the stern as if deciding whether the meal was still worth the effort. Whales avoid shallow water when they can help it, wary of losing the depth and speed that make them so dangerous in open water in the first place. Shallow water was the one place 3 tons of muscle couldn't follow. As the water beneath the hull grew thinner, the fin finally peeled away and disappeared back toward open water. Only then did the otter lift its head. It looked around, calm now, taking in the shallows and the beds of kelp near the shoreline, its actual home. It shuffled to the edge of the swim platform, checked the water below with the same careful patience it had shown all morning, and looked back at Dornellus one last time. Then it slid off the deck and into the calm water, circled the boat once, and swam unhurried toward the kelp beds and out of sight. Dornellus sat back in the silence that followed, still holding a phone full of footage he could hardly believe. "What an unreal way to start a morning," he'd say later, still processing an encounter nobody could have planned for or expected. Within days, the footage from both his camera and Major's was everywhere. News outlets across the country picked it up. Millions of people watched a clip that ran barely 3 minutes long, most of them laughing at the audacity of a wild animal hopping onto a stranger's boat like it owned the place. However, almost none of them stayed long enough to ask what had actually been chasing it, or why. Researchers who reviewed the footage afterward were able to identify the orca by its dorsal fin alone. It carried the catalog number AT-163. It was the largest whale in its entire pod. There was one more detail from that morning, though, one that most people watching the viral clip online never noticed at all. As the orca swam past the boat during the chase, its mouth appeared to be holding something. Dornelis thought it might have been another otter. A biology professor who later reviewed the footage for local reporters said that if that was true, it would only really make sense if the otter clinging to Dornelis's boat had been its mother, circling back toward the boat again and again, not just to escape, but because some instinct in her wouldn't let her swim any farther from the water where she'd lost something. Nobody can say for certain what was really happening just outside the frame that morning. What the footage does prove, beyond any doubt, is what that otter chose to do about it. Faced with the most efficient predator in the entire ocean, it did not simply give up and disappear beneath the surface. It picked the one thing in 200 yards of open water that looked like safety, and it kept coming back to it again and again until it was right. This incredible true story serves as a powerful reminder of the deep, often hidden connections that exist between all living things on this planet. And it proves that in the face of absolute terror, even a wild sea creature knows the life-saving value of a safe harbor.